Hey folks, okay, well I just wanted to wrap things up a little bit, go over what I think we've covered and what I hope you got out of the course, maybe talk a little bit about the final exam and what you can expect there, and we'll see how we go here. I would hope that what you came out with from this course would be just good basic fluency in C++. We've mostly covered kind of a C-ish subset of C++. We'll expand on that a lot in 161 if you go on to that and spend a lot of time on classes and more advanced data structures. But again, you should have the fundamentals of programming in C++ down at this point. And hopefully you've also started picking up the general processes that we go through when we develop software. The idea of sitting down and spending some time on our design first, thinking about a good way to break the problem down into simpler pieces, a good way to break the data down into simpler pieces, come up with a reasonable approach for our solution, and after we have that, then proceed to developing it. And as part of that, going on and developing in sort of an incremental fashion where we go through and build a little bit and compile and test and build a little bit and compile and test. So just good fundamentals. Some of the basics on debugging and on testing and just good overall approaches. Right? The idea of producing quality software means that we also focus on the style that we use, good commenting, good layout, making the program easier to maintain in the future and easier for others to understand in the future. Now, the good news is that now that you've picked up one language or most of one language, picking up another one is going to be far easier. You'll find that when you move on to pick up a second language, probably 80-85% of the knowledge that you need for that language you've already picked up from your first language. The syntax varies, some of the keywords vary, but the basic concepts are pretty similar across most portions of most languages. And if you go on and pick up a third language, it'll be even easier, and etc., etc., etc. Now, I do hope that the course was interesting. I hope it was useful. If you've got feedback on ways you would like to see the course improved, or if you have positive feedback about things that worked particularly well for you, please do feel free to let me know. I always appreciate that kind of information. So, usual email address. And hopefully I'll see lots of you multiple times again. I know a lot of you are in 161 next semester, so I'll see a lot of you then. If you take the software engineering course next year, I'll see all of you there. Hopefully you take maybe the programming languages course further down the road, and I'll see you again. And maybe some of the topics courses in fourth year, things like the compiler course or the metaprogramming course. So I do hope to see lots of you many times in the future. All right, we did cover a lot of ground in the course. Again, we covered a lot of things about programming in general, right? That sort of edit, compile, test cycle. Again, good ideas, good habits in terms of programming, commenting, good style, good standards, following a top-down design approach, using an incremental development approach, getting good at our basic debugging skills and our basic testing strategies, making effective use of abstraction when we're coming up with data types and design and decomposition of problems. And of course, an awful lot about C++ in particular to actually get us to the point where we can program in a real language effectively. So in the beginning, we started with primitive data types, ints and chars and bools and floats and doubles and all that kind of thing. We went through the basics of constants and variables and the basics of computation and the idiosyncrasies in terms of things like integer division and modulo, the use of functions and libraries that are provided for us, the ability to create our own functions and how we specify parameters and return values and make use of those, pass by value, pass by reference, all of that kind of idea. We got into the idea of variables and constants and their scope, so global scope or local to a function or local to a loop. Right? We got through some of the basic control structures like ifs and elses and switches. And of course loops, the while loop and the for loop and the do while loop, and the idea of nesting those loops and how that behaves. We got into arrays for storing kind of sequences of data, And we spent a little bit of time looking at the special use of the null terminator for character arrays, and some of the things like the C-string library routines, string length, and string compare, and that kind of idea. We got into searching and sorting a little bit. Not much. We'll do a lot more of that in the future. We did some file I/O, some use of command line arguments, right? How you actually run the program with command line arguments and how you capture them with argc and argv. We got into structs for taking a bunch of different data fields and encapsulating them together into one single item. And then later on, when we got into pointers, we looked at the kind of notational issues in terms of getting at the fields of structs through a pointer. We spent a lot of time, well, not a lot of time, we spent time on pointers and some of their uses for dynamically allocating arrays or single items or structs, for emulating things like pass by reference. So we did spend some time on that. Again, allocation and deallocation using new and delete. We spent some time on introducing dynamic data types. Again, this is something we'll spend a lot more time on in 161. Things like linked lists or trees or graphs. We ran through some code for linked lists, although we didn't get a lot of chances to experiment with it. And we did that one short session introducing classes and object-oriented programming. So we did cover an awful lot of ground this semester. The final exam is going to be a 3-hour exam written on paper, be held in the gym December, I think it's Thursday, December 16th from 1 to 4 p.m. There are a collection of rules available. Oh, if you follow this link, the one thing is the rules in that link predated the the pandemic, so it doesn't mention the fact that you do need to wear masks, but again, hopefully that's pretty much second nature for folks on campus by now. It is closed book, closed notes, no electronics, no calculators. I will provide you with a reference sheet, so it's about 3 pages of C++ syntax and kind of tiny examples. A copy of it is available there. Do make sure you have a look at it before the exam so you've got a good idea of what is there and what isn't there if you need to refer to it during the exam. And typically on the final exam, there'll be somewhere in the range of 8 to 10 equally weighted questions. So, figure sort of 15 minutes a question as a ballpark. They're mostly applied, but there might be some theory and discussion questions. So a fair number of programming style questions, but there might also be some where you're discussing the pros and cons of different features. The exam questions can cover pretty much anything from the course, the labs, the quizzes, the project material, and of course everything that we've talked about in the lectures. There are a couple of things that I'm explicitly not going to put on the exam. I'm not going to include file I/O, command line arguments, string stream, Linux, or classes. And of course, we only spent a little bit of time going through linked lists and you didn't get much of a chance to program with them, so there will be kind of limited coverage of that on the exam as well, just so you've got an idea of what to expect. The question styles, if you look at old exams, you'll see this kind of a format pretty clearly. It might be things like, here's a code segment, what kind of output does it produce? Sometimes if it involves the user inputting things, then I'll say this is what the user enters, what does it do? I might give questions along the lines of here's a chunk of code and the error message you get when you try and compile it, from that identify the syntax errors in the code. And of course there'll be questions along the lines of write a C++ program to do and I'll describe it, or write a function to do and I'll describe it. Or here's a program, or here's a function, modify it to do this instead. It'll be quite common for me to give you prototypes for functions and ask you to implement different portions of them. Might be a case of I talk about a language feature, or I talk about a chunk of code, and ask you to discuss what's good and what's bad about it, or to ask you to discuss what would be an appropriate way to use it. So again, there can be discussion-style questions that crop up. So when you're preparing for the exam, I really do think that applied practice is the best way to drive home the ideas. Writing, debugging, and testing C++ code using the different features is the best approach overall. If you want to go back over old things you've written, that's helpful as well. if you're going through reading your old code, right? Some of these programs are things that you wrote, a couple of months ago now. So when you're going through your old code, your old quiz answers, look at them now. You know more now than you did then. Think about what you would do differently, knowing what you know now. Thinking about how you could improve what you did then. I'd certainly recommend going through old exams and old exam questions. The one thing I would caution there is that a lot of the old exams focused very heavily on printf and scanf, whereas this term we focused more on cin and cout. I will expect you to be able to do a little bit of printf and scanf and a little bit of cin and cout, but with most questions, it's kind of your choice which input-output format you want to use. So copies of old exams are available at that URL. If you want to get a hold of me in the few days before the exam, I'll have office hours on Zoom on Monday and Wednesday from 1 to 3, or you can email me or catch me on Discord, and we can chat things out that way. The Zoom links are in one of the very first announcements on the VIU Learn page, or the Zoom meeting IDs and password, rather. The Help Center's also got some hours that week, so Monday the 13th and Wednesday the 15th from 5 to 7 p.m. They'll have sessions in there, so if you want to practice and go over ideas. And of course, they're all students who have gone through this exam, many of them with me, so they can probably give you good advice if you want to drop into those sessions. During the exam itself, just a couple of things I would tend to recommend. First thing, go through all of the exam questions briefly. Just take a couple of minutes on each of the different exam questions, flip through them, and just kind of note which ones look like they're going to be easy for you and which ones you think might be a little bit more difficult. Everybody's got different things that they're better at and different things that they struggle at a little bit more. So go through and look at the easy ones and knock those off first. Right? Go through, identify the easy ones, go through the exam, do those easy ones first, get all the, sort of quote-unquote easy marks first. And those are the things that you're probably going to do most quickly. And so after that, if you start working through the more difficult ones, you'll have more time available to spend on them. One of the big risks on an exam like this is you get bogged down on one question and you spend a huge amount of time on one question and then don't have enough time to finish other questions that might have been easier later in the exam, and you wind up losing marks that way. So I would recommend, again, go through it, do the easiest ones first, the hardest ones later. On that first try of each question, don't spend more than 15 minutes on any question. Right? Keep an eye on the clocks. When you've spent 15 minutes on a question, move on to another one. Once you've tried every question once, then go back, see how much time you've got left, go back and spend time on the questions that you didn't finish. And as far as answering the questions go, if you only know part of the answer, write it down, right? Part marks are a lot better than no marks. If you just leave a question blank, I can't give you anything but a 0. But if you go through and show me which parts of the answer you did know, then that helps. If you can kind of remember how to do something, but don't remember the syntax or don't remember the specifics, write down so that I know that you have the idea of how to solve it. You're just stuck on a syntax problem. So do make sure that you let me know what you know in terms of answering the question, and I can give you credit for that. So I think those would be the big things that I would advise in terms of preparing for the exam and taking the exam. Again, during the exam itself, feel free to stick up your hand and ask me questions if you don't understand what a particular question is asking you to do. I can't give you any of the answers or hints, obviously, but I can clarify the questions if you need that. All right, I will leave that there. Good luck, folks.